So I just wrapped up an email exchange with the gentleman behind Comicron. I wanted to reach out to him to run a few things by him to make sure that the way that I was thinking about something was indeed accurate, and he was able to confirm that I was headed down the right path. And so I want to record this video while a lot of this stuff is fresh in my mind. What I will tell you is that we have a problem. We have an ongoing problem with data. And in this video, we are going to talk about the issue that I see right now that I technically spoke about a couple of years ago that is now bearing fruit. Stay tuned. Reggie here, and I want to welcome you to another one of my videos. There are a couple of data issues that I see right now. I'm going to talk about one of them in this video, and I'm going to save the other for a future video, so you definitely want to subscribe to the channel in order to not miss that video. A few months ago, I created a video in which I spoke about the lack of transparency around print run information. I am a huge fan of data. I like data because it helps me to make more informed decisions. And having some insight into how many copies of a comic that have been printed helps me. To know how many copies are out there absolutely helps me. It helps me to understand how big the pie is. And then from looking at CGC and CBCS databases, it helps me to better understand how that pie has been sliced up. But up until this point, we really haven't received any information on actual print run information. And I think that that's a shame. I created those videos at a time in which there were some controversies that were happening where books that were supposed to be rare and hard to find suddenly were showing up in Walmart multi-packs and in other places where they otherwise should not have been. And now fast forward a few months, we have another controversy on our hands with Spawn issue number 306, the Nether Realms variant. And there are videos on YouTube that talk about that. But this lack of transparency around print run information is problematic. And I was openly mocked in the comment section for some of these videos for saying, hey, transparency is actually important. Now, that isn't the topic of this video, but I think that it does demonstrate that there are legitimate problems with the comic book industry and the lack of transparency, because there were people that spent real money to get Spawn 306 because they thought that there were only 50 copies in existence. And now we are seeing copies flood eBay, and we have, I think, 84 or so copies that have already made their way to CGC for grading when it was supposed to only be limited to around 50 copies. So the new challenge that we have is that there hasn't been any distribution data that has been released for the comic book industry since April of 2022. What I mean by that is that we do not know how many copies of comics have been ordered and sent to LCSs, either from Diamond, from Penguin, or from Lunar. None of these distributors have released any type of distribution data. And for years, we were able to get this data from Diamond, so we would have some idea, if you will, of how well the comic book market was performing. This data helped us to understand what percentage of the market was owned by Marvel or DC or Image or Dark Horse or whoever it happens to be. But we literally have received no data since April of 2022. There were a lot of people during the pandemic that celebrated the breakup of Diamond's monopoly. And during the pandemic, I warned that this breakup could actually be a bad thing. It could be detrimental. And we are now seeing the effects of that breakup to the point where, as I mentioned, we do not know how well the comic book market is performing. We have no understanding. We have no data to actually guide us. We have no data to look at. Comic shops are at a disadvantage. I think that creators are actually at a disadvantage. I'm guessing that they get some data, but I don't know. But if you think about it, we always have these conversations around who dominates the comic book market, right? Is it Marvel? Is it DC? What percentages? You know, who are the independents? How much ground has Dark Horse made up on Image? We talk about how the comic book industry looks versus manga. And right now we have nothing to actually go on. So anybody that tells you that the market is not performing well or that the market is performing well literally has no clue what they're talking about, because there is no data. And earlier today, I learned that there are some powers that be that are having some conversations about this lack of data. And there was actually a couple of articles that came out on Bleeding Cool about this very topic, but there are conversations that are happening. And unfortunately, the conversations seem to revolve around how many copies of comics have actually been sold to consumers. I personally think that that data would be a huge waste, right? Because how many comics go to a consumer doesn't really help me to understand how the market is performing. That is a smaller slice of the pie. I still want to know what the pie actually looks like. I want to know distributor level data. Ideally, I want to know publisher print run data, but that's neither here nor there. If I can't get that, I want to know how many copies of comics are distributed to the market, because that data is extremely helpful. My challenge here is that we have challenges, and I don't know if these challenges are actually going to be resolved. So I would encourage you to be cautious. Be cautious about how much money you are choosing to spend on comics that are supposed to be rare or hard to find or limited. Take caution with what you believe in terms of how the comic book market is actually performing. And I think we also have to have some hope that the industry is actually going to get itself together and start cooperating with one another so that they can put this data together so that they can know how things are performing, and through that we can know how things are performing. As I alluded to earlier in this video, there is another major gap in data that I see that I'm going to talk about in another video. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I definitely want to encourage you to do so, because there is more to come. If you want to reach out to me, you can do that on Instagram at Regie Collects. Take care.
This thing on? Mic check. I just want to make sure y'all can hear me clearly. Yeah. Should you practice art, or should art be your practice? I had a question, so I asked it. Not to anyone specifically, but to my inner God, you know? The one that's gonna be a master, the one that's more than a rapper, the one that's an educator, the one that seeks enlightenment. He travels with concepts, he's got the mindset expansive. He understands that his time combined with travel and concepts makes his mind convex. Sort of like when you look at a brain scan, straight off meditation, we was concaving until we had that eternal dialogue that created our dialect. Now we in distinct rooms of pure souls having them conversations, synergy and combinations. You fly and we waiting, Indian style in the gold.